I'm Howard Fuller, and I'm actually an ed reformer. I actually am proud to say that, but I want you to understand why. I grew up in Milwaukee in the Hillside Housing Project. And then after a while, my mother moved us over on 11th Street between Reservoir and Vine in the inner city. That's code word for poor black people lived in our community. And so my mother, Juanita Smith, and my grandmother, Pearl Wagner, told me, boy, you going to college. And I didn't know you could ask why. You know, like my grandson was with me for Thanksgiving, and I told this little dude to do something, and he asked me why. I was grown before I knew there was a word called why. I never knew that you could actually ask why. So they said, hey, you going to college? I said, yes, ma'am. And that was it. But what also happened was I bought into it. You know, I bought into that idea of going to college. And so this whole idea of ed reform is personal to me. And I want to explain like 4 reasons why I think it's important, or 4 reasons that describe like what ed reform means to me, or what I think needs to happen to really have ed reform. First of all, it's very important that low-income and working-class people in this country have choice. I think that is a critical thing, because I know that you all don't want to have an America where only those of us with money have the ability to choose the best educational environment for our children. I know that you feel like I do, that we've got these 3 sectors in America. We've got the traditional public schools, and we've got private schools, and we've got charter schools. Each sector has great schools, each sector has terrible schools. What I want to see is to make sure that low-income and working-class parents can look at these 3 choices and say, this is the one for my child. Because you all know that if you have 3 kids, you look at one of them every day and you say, is this one really mine? Because they're so different, right? And you know that for each of your 3 kids, you will need like different choices. And I think all of you would also agree with me. Like, I love the Obamas and everything, but I don't think they ought to be the only ones who live in public housing, as Bernice King said, and have choice. I'll let that settle in for a moment. So this idea of parent choice is crucial to me. It's important. But the second thing is that if people are going to have choice, and choice is about freedom, then you want to make sure that the choices are quality. You want to make sure that when people choose, they have great schools to choose from. Because I do believe that education is about liberation. It's about freedom. And so if people have freedom, but the freedom is to choose from mediocrity, then it's the illusion of freedom. So that the fight for quality has to be a critical part of ed reform. But at the same time, it isn't just about high test scores. We want to develop kids who can do what? Engage in the practice of freedom. Paulo Freire said, it's not just about preparing young people to engage in what is currently there and conform to it. It's giving them the skills that they need so that they can engage in the practice of freedom, the transformation of their world. So these quality schools have to mean more than test scores. It has to give these kids, these students, these young people, the connection back to the communities from which they come. I want them to understand and buy into the biblical notion that to those of us who much is given, much is expected. So that when we talk about quality, from my ed reform space, as the young people say, or sector, or whatever we say, I want to make sure that these young people come out and they've got this commitment to personal excellence, but also a commitment to excellence for their community, for their people. And so that's what I mean when I talk about quality schools. Third is, and this is very important, there's a big debate going on right now. Is the ed reform movement a movement? And some people, no, it ain't a movement. Some people said it is. So I'm not even going to argue that. I'm going to declare it's a movement. But since I just declared that, one of the things that's important about the movement is who leads it. And so here you have this movement that's essentially led by white people, and they're having interesting discussions every day about what to do with these black and brown people. And so at some point in time, I think it has to become clear that if education is about liberation, then it is true that the people who are being liberated have to be a critical part of their own liberation. And at some point in time, what we've got to figure out is, how do we do not just diversity, how do we do power? When does the transfer take place? When are we going to reach the point where we're very clear that if this is going to work long term, that somehow we've got to change the narrative and make sure that the people who we're trying to liberate are critical definers of what they need to be liberated. So, like, I'll give a story of New Orleans, a place I love, and I'm worried about for a whole bunch of reasons. But, I went down there and I talked to like 17 black people. And I just asked them like 2 questions, man. Like, what do you think about ed reform? And what do you think about black people's role in it? And there was sort of like 3 groups of black people, right? There was the ones who was like mad, just mad. And then there's the ones who like support what's going on but have questions. And then there's those of us who drank the Kool-Aid. No matter which one of those 3, all of them had the same thing. This is being done to us, not with us. That narrative has to be changed. And then finally, people talk about what we got to do to improve schools, but we also got to talk about what's happening to our kids before they ever get to us. We must talk about the fact that race matters in America and class matters. A lot of young people have told me that we're in post-racial America. I'm just waiting for y'all to tell me what that is, because on my block, race still matters. In America, the America I know, class matters. In fact, one of the things I'm most clear about is the only people in America who say that money don't matter, they got money. Nobody who's rolling around in America broke is talking about how cool it is to be rolling around in America broke. It don't happen. That's a cocktail party discussion after you high, looking down, money really don't matter. I'm like, hey man, it don't matter. Give me yours. Let me try that for. So we gotta be real clear that race matters, class matters. You all know, those of you who work in schools, those of you know anything about this, you know that some of these kids ought to get a medal just for showing up at school, given everything that they're going through to even get to those schools on a day-to-day basis. And so it's gotta be clear to you all that if you're hungry, it's hard to come to school and learn. If you've been abused and neglected, it's hard to come to school every day and learn. I'll tell you a story. When I was superintendent, I went to visit the school. In fact, when I was superintendent, I visited every single school in Milwaukee. It took me 4 years, which is as long as I lasted. But it took me 4 years to visit every single school. So one day I was at a school on a Monday, and a father, I think, brought his little daughter in, and his mother had been sent to Tachita over the weekend. Tachita is the women's prison in Wisconsin. And so they brought the little girl in. Can you imagine what she must have gone through that weekend? They bring her in, and everybody says, that's nice, let's go to class. No, there's gotta be something that happens for that child, given everything that she's just gone through, before we say, just go to class. And so when we talk about what we gotta do with ed reform, we gotta talk about all of these things that are happening to these kids before they ever get to us. And at the same time, and I just gotta say this, people say no excuses. No excuses cannot be the same thing as no empathy. Because we gotta be clear, if kids are sleeping in a car the night before, that matters. And to say, oh, no excuses, no. we got to be clear. Yes, we got to do everything that we can to make sure that those kids learn, no matter what those experiences are. But we can't act like those experiences have no impact on them when they come into our building. So if we truly ed reformers, we got to fight for the conditions that will make the communities better before the kids ever get to us. And then we can't form all of these conclusions about kids just because of the way they wear their hair. Or you got these young brothers who, run around with their pants hanging down. And at first I had a problem with it. And then I realized that, you know what? These dudes actually understand physics because there's no other explanation for how they can do this. So already I see them as future scientists. And we just had not understood that before. And I know y'all talk about Chris Rock, who's my dude, but I'm gonna talk about Richard Pryor, who was Chris Rock before Chris Rock. And so what Richard Pryor would say is, man, if you got these young dudes who got their pants hanging down and they can not only run, but they can low run, that's something. See, I got people who know about low running. So the whole idea here is you can't say these kids can't do stuff because their pants, you're gonna tell them to pull it up, and we tell them to pull it up, but you can't form conclusions about how capable they are based on that, or based on how they wear their hair, or their music, or whatever it is. All these things we use to conclude that these kids are not capable of greatness. Howard Gardner already told us all we need to know. The question is not, how intelligent are you? The question is, how are you intelligent? And there's all of these different ways that our kids are intelligent that we must understand and we must tap into. So yeah, ed reform is personal to me. It means everything to me. And you know why? Because the kids that are in the school where I chair the board, when I see them every day, I see myself. They're running the same streets, man, that I ran. And so when they try to run some stuff on me, I'm like, hey, man, I did that 5 times. You can't run that on me. But when I look in their eyes, I know that maybe they don't have Pearl Wagner and Juanita Smith telling them, you going to college. So you know what? I'm going to tell them. And I know people say, oh, everybody can't go to college. I talked about this afternoon. And I keep saying, I hear y'all, but most of y'all who tell kids they don't have to go to college, hell, y'all went to college. So tell me who makes that decision. When do we decide who can go and who can't, and whose decision is that? I'm saying I'm going to prepare you in a relentless and rigorous way so that you can decide if that's what you want to do at that point in your life. And so, yeah, ed reform is important to me because it's going to make all the difference in these children's lives. And so if there's an image that I want to leave you with, it's this one. On February 1st, 1960, 4 students from North Carolina A&T sat down at a lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and demanded to be served. And here we are in 2014. 4 black students sit down at a lunch counter where they're welcome and can't read the menu. How did this happen in America? This is America. And we must reform education in all the ways that works, because these kids, they deserve better than what we are currently giving them. And as I tell them all the time, education in America guarantees you nothing, but I will guarantee you, you will have nothing without an education. Education reform is a necessity. Thank you very much.